the Soccer Podcast from dailyfantasylobby.com.
Hey everyone, welcome to dailyfantasylobby.com Soccer Podcast. Now, as you can see, I'm on my own today. David, unfortunately, has taken ill, so you're stuck with me running the rule over this weekend's upcoming games on Mondogoal and on DraftKings. But for a bit of fun, because David's not at his best, instead of me giving you my picks, I'm going to run the rule over his picks. And to be honest, I'm going to rip him to pieces. Or that's the plan anyway. We'll see. He's actually picked a decent side, particularly on DraftKings. You'll be able to see this up on the screen right about now. The selections that he's made. In goals, he's gone for Costel Pantilimon of Sunderland against West Ham. Now, the reasons for this, I'm going to go ahead and assume, are that West Ham are a bit toothless up front at the moment. They're missing their main strikers. And as anyone will attest, when you're sort of in the middle pack in the Premier League, i.e. when you're not one of the big 5 or 6 clubs, the strength and depth rapidly diminishes. Now, for example, West Ham, let's say they have no Andy Carroll this weekend, they're going to have to replace him with someone like Carlton Cole. Now, Carlton Cole isn't a terrible footballer by any stretch, but he's no Andy Carroll. There's a definite weakness there. And David has clearly gambled on the fact that Sunderland, if you could say this about a team that shipped 4 before halftime at the weekend, they don't tend to actually concede very many goals. There's one other factor in play, and that is they have got an interim manager, Dick Advocat, the little general, as he's known. Advocat has a decent pedigree. He's kicked around a lot of international teams. He did well managing in Russia, and he did well managing in Scotland at Rangers. So Advocat is relatively highly regarded. He actually nearly took the Sunderland manager job after, I believe it was Roy Keane left about 5 years ago. But that's another story. Anyway, David's banking on that provoking a reaction from the Sunderland players. Personally, I think if Sunderland do perform well defensively this weekend, it'll probably be more an example of regression to the mean than anything else. They don't concede that many goals for one of the struggling teams, and simply just because they conceded a bunch last weekend doesn't mean that conceding 4 by halftime is now their new level. Most likely they'll regress to roughly where they tend to be, which is being pretty solid defensively and pretty toothless up front. So on we go. Neil Taylor of Swansea is one of David's defensive picks. Swansea are playing Aston Villa, and of course Swansea are having an excellent season under Gary Monk. A lot of people tip them to struggle. Personally, I thought they would do okay this season because I think they've actually strengthened. That is up until the mid-season sale of Wilfred Bonney. But the players that they lost, guys like Borm, they replaced, and Michu, of course, they replaced very, very well in Gylfi Sigurdsson and Lucas Fabianski. So I don't think they're particularly worse off this season. In fact, I think they're a bit better off. David clearly concurs with that theory because he's gone for a Swansea defender. Now, Villa, of course, scored 4 last weekend, but in general, they've been kind of weak up front. Agbon Lahore and Benteke are a fearsome front two. And actually, both David and I selected Agbon Lahore as kind of our sleeper pick last weekend. We picked him up on the cheap, and he banged in 2 goals. We're both delighted, and that was a large reason for our subsequent success in our DFS picks last weekend. Moving onwards, David's gone for Phil Bardsley, Stoke at Crystal Palace, or rather a home tie for Stoke against Crystal Palace. Now, Bardsley has been most in the headlines recently for knocking Wayne Rooney out with a punch while messing around, but that has no impact on his footballing abilities, which are, I'm trying to think of a delicate way of putting it, agricultural, I believe, is probably the nicest term that I can come up with. He's kind of an old school defender, very solid in the tackle, very, very strong guy, doesn't offer too much going forward, but he is cheap. His FPPG, as you can see on the screen, 6.3. Not bad, not great. But David's clearly gambled on him. I must admit, I'm not that thrilled with that selection. But what do I know? Moving on to the midfield, David has gone with Aaron Ramsey, who was superb coming off the bench for Arsenal at Monaco midweek. Arsenal have a tricky game against Newcastle. Newcastle are the exact team that you don't want to face coming off a tough European game, because Newcastle at home, obviously with the fans very close to the pitch, really noisy, always up for it. Newcastle away from home is a whole different story, but that's for another day as well. Aaron Ramsey is an outstanding player, one of the best midfielders in the league, and I certainly can't criticise anyone for putting him in the team. And note, at just $6,100, Aaron Ramsey looks like an absolute steal. He's just returning from injury, and that's the only reason I can come up with for such a cheap price. And David has elected to couple him with Yannick Bolasie, a guy that I'm a big fan of. And if you remember, if you watched last week's video, I actually selected him for my team. Palace at Stoke, if they can feed the wide men, they've always got a chance. And with a massive 9.4 FPPG, I think Bolasie is a good pick. 6,700 is kind of steep for someone who's not like a real big name star. But David obviously kind of deemed it worth the risk, and he's gone for it. And up front, Connor Wickham and Alexis Sanchez. Alexis Sanchez, I'm not even going to comment on. That guy picks himself. He is so good and a constant threat. When he's not scoring, he's creating. Arsenal's form has been outstanding recently. And Connor Wickham, David and I completely disagree on this guy. He will probably start up front for Sunderland. But while David sees him as a midfielder playing up front, I actually see him more, believe it or not, as a striker playing in midfield. He tends to drop a bit deeper. He tends not to be in the penalty box getting on the end of things, notwithstanding his incredible flurry last season towards the end of term when Sunderland completed the Great Escape. Wickham was a heavy focal point for them. But since he signed his new contract, I haven't really been feeling it from this guy. If I'm honest, I've never particularly seen it in this guy. He's a handful, but I don't think he's particularly much more than that. But what do I know? The proof of the pudding will be in the tasting, and we'll see how David's team plays out this weekend. His flexi player has gone with Santi Cazorla. Now that kind of doesn't warrant too much discussion either. 10.4 FPPG, decent price at $8,500. This guy is gold. He is, as I said last week, in my opinion, he's been the outstanding player in the league since the turn of the year. I will never ever criticise someone for picking Cazorla as their flex player. And of course, on Mondogoal, we have the added bonus of being able to pick from Sunday's games too. So we're not just stuck with Saturday's fixtures as we are on DraftKings. So looking up the dailyfantasylobby.com injury and suspension center, which you can find under the soccer tab, we'll see that Liverpool versus Man U, we've got projected starting 11s, we've got projected formations, we've got injuries. David has gone for a very similar side on DraftKings as he did on Mondogoal, but he's actually picked Marouane Fellaini for his Mondogoal lineup. Now, Fellaini is a classic example of a midfielder playing up front, but a midfielder playing up front can be golden for you because you're getting assists, you're getting goals, and you're getting a guy that's going to be right in amongst the action. On Mondogoal, you get rewarded for making really kind of nuanced plays. It's not as simple as just getting points for assists, goals, and of course clean sheets, etc. for defensive-minded players. So David has gone for Marouane Fellaini. So Fellaini is David's only pick from the Sunday fixtures. The rest of his lineup is made up of George Boyd and Dusan Tadic, Southampton and Burnley players. Both very, very good players and both good picks if you can pick them up on the cheap. George Boyd at 5,700, he's a creative player. He can score, as we saw against Man City at the weekend. but he can also create. The guy's very capable of pulling out an assist, so he's a decent sleeper option. And Tadic is the whole package. Very, very strong player. He's got high FPPG. He's kind of highly rated at 7,800, but I think that certainly David has deemed that the juice is worth the squeeze with this guy. Now, I'm going to wrap up the video. I want to keep this one quick because who needs to see me just wittering on for half an hour? Most of all, we'd like to hear what you think. We'd like suggestions, we'd like comments and what have you. If you want to share this video about, simply spread the love, spread the word about dailyfantasylobby.com, then it would be most welcome and appreciated. As always, we wish you the best of luck in your DFS picks this weekend, and hopefully we'll catch you next week.